so cool to have you here today.
Thanks for inviting me, Max. I'm thrilled that we got a chance to connect, and I'm looking forward to having our coffee and tea together.
Me too, because like you had quite a background. You led at GE, Hasbro, Disney, LVMH. I always mispronounce it. Was that correct?
Yeah, that's right. You got it.
And then you jumped like to do your own thing. You thought like, hey, I might go independent. So what made you go that route? And at what point did you realize it? And how long has it been?
Yeah. So the first time I was independent was when I was 16 years old, and I owned a car parking business with some of my friends. So we used to park cars at parties. And I don't know that was the wisest thing for people to let us do. At the 16 years old, we were all new with our permits, and we were very happy to be driving all these cool cars. But it was actually something that gave me the taste of being on my own very early. And I put that aside, and I was never actually on my own until I started working on my speaking and consulting business a couple of years ago. So I guess it's always been in the back of my mind, having worked for the companies that you mentioned, GE, Hasbro, Disney, and LVMH. I was very blessed to work for great companies for long periods of time and had multiple opportunities in those companies. So as I got, I think, towards the end of my time at LVMH, I had been in Asia for 17 years working for Disney and Hasbro and LVMH, and I moved back to France. Then I started to think, my mindset started to evolve a bit. And I thought, okay, maybe now is the time to jump back in, not to park cars. That business was closed, but to think about doing something different and really trying to take advantage of what I had learned and share that with others, which is really the genesis of why I got into the speaking and consulting business.
What was like what would you say, like, was that part of like freedom, lifestyle, more mission driven, or what was like the top 2 reasons you decided to, because it's quite a big step to leave such a company?
Yeah. I always say working in companies like that is like being in a gilded cage. Those are some great cages, but they are still, you're constrained at some point. And I'm an incredibly curious person, and I'm fortunate to have a wealth of optimism to draw from. So I thought, okay, maybe there's something else out there. I had, of course, many friends and colleagues who had taken that jump from corporate into their own work. But ultimately, I think to your question, it was really more a mission-driven jump. I was given great benefit and great privilege by working in those organizations, having had a good education, and of course, back to my parents' upbringing. And over all that time, I worked for incredible people who taught me things. And as one of the bosses later in my career told me, who had also made this jump, he said, you have an obligation to give back now because you've been blessed with so much. And so that started to weigh on my mind. I started to write books. And in the writing of the book process, that also allowed me a lot of reflection, and ultimately came to the point that I decided the corporate routine of what I was doing became less interesting to me. And the output of what I had been doing became much more interesting to me. And that's when finally I decided to take a leap. And it was, it's, opening the golden cage and looking outside and jumping out of the cage. You can't go back in very easily. And you give up a lot of, regular care and feeding, and you have to start to generate that yourself. And I think that was probably some of the things I was least prepared for.
And how long time has it been now?
So I left my full-time global role in end of 2023. I was fortunate enough to have basically been a full-time consultant with LVMH for another year. So I had sort of this kind of an off-ramp, I would say. And then at the end of 2024, I was really full-time on my own.
So the off-ramp, the off-ramp, like, can you just share that? Like, did you work like 2-3 days for them, or like 1 day? Because that's like, how did that work for you?
Again, I was fortunate to have gotten advice from people. So I was talking to people that I was working with, and as well as people who had already done this kind of transition. And people approach it in different ways. You'll read, different experts will tell you different things. One expert will say, when you stop working full time, just stop, take 6 months off, don't make any decisions, and, use that time. That's just not my mindset. So I had started probably during COVID. So let's say this is sort of late 2020, 2021, to think more seriously about making the move. That was
Yeah.
the first thing for me, which was getting my head around it. Then I sort of needed a platform or a kind of a surfboard into the next wave. And that surfboard was writing a book. And so I wrote a book
Okay.
called Bond, Belonging and the Keys to Inclusion and Connection, which was very much related to the work I was doing in human capital space, in talent space, and in diversity and inclusion. And as I sort of was transitioning from one thing to another, then I started to think about, okay, how am I going to animate this book? How am I going to, commercialize it and make it a book that's not just a book, but becomes a message and something that I can pass forward? Again, if I go back to the mission part of what I was doing, I know that selling books in and of itself is a tough business.
Yeah.
The business for me always was taking the message from the book and being able to forward that through speaking and consulting.
Yeah. It's just interesting. I work with some speakers and they want to go full time, but they often have a family, kids, and quitting their full time job. It's always it's always as stressful. But yeah, I think the best thing is to have some consultancy, at least like 40% lined up. So you're having cash flow and you have 3-4 days a week to work on your book and work on getting speeches, right? So you have kind of that through LVMH.
And I was also very much, my KPI, so to speak, of when I left the corporate world and I started into this independent world was to be at a point where I didn't lose money. So that's a pretty low KPI.
Yeah.
But I prepared myself for that. I prepared by, making sure that I took a few less vacations. I did a few less of this and that to make sure that there was some economizing during that time so that during this transition time, I had a buffer and it allowed me to move forward the way I thought I should rather than being forced to do things that maybe wouldn't have made sense long term. And again, I was ramping one down as I was ramping the other up. So that gave me the opportunity to think. I do have to be completely transparent to say,
Please.
I didn't really know what I was ramping up to. And I didn't know what the path was going to be moving forward. So it was a lot easier to know how this was going to end than this was going to go because I had never done it. I had worked in big global companies for 35 plus years. And I always say you can move from one company to another and it's sort of same show, different theater.
Yeah.
When you move out of that big theater into another thing that's your own, it's a different show and it's a different theater. And so that's what I had to learn.
How was it emotionally like to go from a big role and structure to, hey, it's just me now? Like, did you have some sleepless night? Did you wake up and thinking I'm going to send an email or go back to my job? Like, how was it actually emotional? Like, how did you cope with that?
So one of the things I did in the beginning was, as I was ramping down, I made sure that I kept in contact with all of the executive headhunters I knew, so that in case I did have that panic moment, that I knew somehow, okay, this was just a bad idea, then I could pick up the phone and go back and land again. The further I got away from that, the less that became something that I wanted to do. And because I had been speaking with other people who had made the journey, that helped me to get through some of those psychologically more difficult times. I had an experience recently that was very telling. I think maybe more telling of the shock of the psychological shock of leaving a company, which could be very comfortable. Is I actually had an opportunity to go back and visit one of the Moet Hennessy LVMH offices. I was invited to attend a speaker, and I forgot how that felt to be in an office surrounded by people, having a coffee with people, just sitting and chit-chatting. When you go out on your own, our office is our home. It's oftentimes, our interactions are very one-on-one. They're also oftentimes very transactional. Whereas in an office, you have a camaraderie and a collegiality. And I think for me, that's the thing that I have tried to recreate as best I can through, I think through organizations like yours. That's a great place for people like us to find that, where we're in community with other people who are doing similar work or trying to build something, rather than just feeling like you're on your own with your network, with your sales material, with your book, whatever it is, trying to do that solo.
Yeah, I think that's a dark side of speaking very few speak about, and it's like it is a very lonely solo show, especially like if you're doing consultancy and stuff. And I don't know if you feel the same, but like I also have some consulting customers and we meet on Google Meet and Zoom and whatever, but it's still at the end of the day it's just me and often home office, and it
Yeah,
can
yeah.
become lonely. Where I see that works for a lot of speakers now recently is that more and more speakers go together and be like, hey, let's develop this leadership program. I do this, you do that. And they work together, they travel together. It feels like a duo, co-author books, working together on different projects. And I've done that with a few speakers, like Arma Vesta from Norway is a really good speaker. And just that process, it just feels like, hey, we're a team, and it feels like this collective. So
I just had an experience. I just launched my second book. It's titled Rally, A Guide to Building Resilience. And at the launch of the book was supposed to be, well, it was finally at a leadership conference, women's leadership conference in Boston. The original idea I was going to do it with was with a colleague of mine, a woman that I've met, and I just think the world of her. So we were going to do this together. She has a body of work around Asian leadership. I had this body of work around inclusive leadership and resilience. Well, as we got closer to the event, it turns out she couldn't participate. So all of a sudden I was on my own at this very big moment. In hindsight, it was probably better for me because I needed to get out there. I needed to test this new keynote. I needed to get in front of a large group of people. But that sort of aloneness is can be tough. And I think, again, especially for people who have had experiences as we have, senior experiences with teams of people that we managed, teams of people we worked with, to suddenly then be the team. And, a lot of the people, the people I work with now that I've figured this out over time is I still have a team. They just don't sit here with me. I have a team of people who help me with marketing, with social media, with speech coaching, with drafting of things. So I've rebuilt the team in a different way, in a more virtual way. That wasn't so obvious to me when I first made the transition.
So that could be like would you say that was one of the biggest thing you underestimated about transitioning?
Yeah, because I just didn't know, again, where I was headed. I knew, I would see somebody like you. I would watch you. I would see you online. I'm like, well, that's exactly the kind of presence I want to have. That's the impact I want to have. But nobody tells you like how you got from where I was at that point to where you are now. I mean, it's a lot of work. It's a lot of practice. It's a lot of networking. It's a lot of marketing. And so even when I was writing my first book, I was doing it in sequence. I was, doing the interviews, doing the data research, writing the book, editing the book, getting the book cover done. And then at the end of the process, I was like, I don't even have a website. What am I going to do with this thing? And in essence, the book, I'm the brand. The book is kind of an association. The second book is the same way. I have to build up my own brand. And because it was just not my background, I had not thought about it that way. So, I wrote my second book, I was much more fluent with working in parallel. I'm doing the data research, but I'm also thinking about how is that going to land at the end, and how am I going to market that, and who are going to be my ambassadors, and who's going to help me, read this? How am I going to develop a book that can become a program that I could potentially work with other people on? As you noted, teaming up with other people is important. So that's an evolution, and I'm not sure how you do that other than going through it.
Yeah. And what kept you grounded? Like in the like, I'm thinking like in the messy early phase, like what helped you? Was it to have a strict routine? Was surrounded by mentors? You said like you talked to some people, got some advice. Who were those? What did you do about like health and family, or like what kept you grounded and like not panic mode and make it through this transition?
It's a great question. I'm not sure I survived completely without panic mode. I think a little bit of panic mode helped from time to time. Because I didn't have a boss asking me for anything anymore. The timeline was mine, the deliverables were mine. And the reality of being in this work is unless you have signed a contract to do something for somebody, nobody's really chasing me. That's a big difference. When you're working in a senior role in a company, I can't remember the last time I walked into the office wherever I was around the world and thought, what am I going to do today? Because when you're in that kind of job, the work just comes at you. The people come at you. Everything's coming at you. And your role is to kind of prioritize that, influx and more decide what you're not going to do than what you are going to do. When you go out on your own, it's the inverse. Okay, where am I going to spend my time? What's going to make a difference? So for me, I relied heavily on mentors, people who had been through the transition, but not just people who had been through the transition, people that knew me and also had done that, maybe a few steps ahead of me. I am a, very firm believer that you have to have health as a basis for everything else.
Yeah.
And so I have always been very cognizant of not losing too much sleep for a long period of time, not skipping the gym for a long period of time, not eating poorly for a long period of time. Of course, we have moments where, we eat a few things that we shouldn't, but to not get into that routine, because I think it then feeds on it can become not only physically detrimental, but psychologically detrimental. So that helped me get through those times. And, you can, I think people can be, as I can, very hard on myself, have a lot of doubt of myself in moments. I think not in aggregate, I'm not that way. Again, I said I'm, generally pretty optimistic. That's when you need people. That's when you need, for me, my husband. He's like, it's a good book. It's going to do well.
Yeah.
That's when I need, former bosses who I can call up and say, you're really good at that. You don't need to worry about that part. Or call up different colleagues and say, hey, have you thought about talking to this company or that company? Maybe they can help you out. That got me through the periods of when I would say I was kind of wandering in the wilderness without any GPS. It helped keep me at least moving forward when again, I didn't necessarily know what the destination was.
Yeah, I think it's just so important to have it, especially if you're doing public speaking, to have public speaker friends. I have a few very good, like Thomas, Atle, and Arman, and we can call like 9 o'clock in the evening, whatever. And it can be like somebody calls me like, hey, they said they were super happy, but they gave me 4 stars instead of 5. Why did this happen? Or it can be like,
exactly.
they said they were super happy. It's the best I've seen. Or like I was like emceeing for the first time and I was so nervous and I call like Arman in the middle of the work. I just went outside. I sat down outside. I'm like, Arman, I don't know if I can do it. I have half day left. I need to keep the energy up or what? And he's like, hey man, it's good, right? They're happy. It's good. And I'm like, okay. So having these people who support you and like say like, I felt the same. And it's so important to have this team, I think, around you who,
I think so.
Who's friends
and, also,
and support you.
I think it's also really important to go and listen to people speak, especially if speaking is one of the things you want to do. I worked for big companies that trained me how to speak in public and would put a microphone. I had to walk I'd be traveling around Asia. You'd walk into a meeting room or a conference room or a presentation hall in Shanghai or Sydney or Paris or New York. You'd get a microphone in your hand and it's like, please speak to these 200 people. So you learn how to do that, but that's different than a keynote. That's different than delivering a specific speech about a specific topic. So I tried as best I could, even at the end of my corporate life, to watch, observe, take notes, be inspired by as many speakers as I could, to also think, okay, I'd like to be that kind of speaker, or maybe that's not the edge I would take, and that also helped me. I have to say, can be very intimidating as well. You and I were talking a couple weeks ago, and I was looking at this lineup of people that you're associated with. I mean, that's an intimidating group of people. Incredible speakers, have done incredible executive work in their time, but can also be people who can be intimidating for a more junior speaker, more entry level. But you have to do that to yourself.
Yeah.
Otherwise, you're never going to get to that level. And if we're not committed to get to that level, to be, 5-star, Michelin rated speaker, then it's not really worth getting into, because ultimately you want to make impact, and those people are making great impact.
But the cool thing about speakers, like after 12 years, and everyone I speak to also agrees, is like speakers are so friendly people in general, and they love helping each other. It's very little competitive, like in terms of other, like, oh, I'm not going to share with you my sales openers or this and that. In speaking, everybody's so, like, they're so open. Like,
I agree.
So really want to help. And what you said about listening to other speakers, what I found worked really great is the agency that represents me in Norway, they sometimes arrange these evenings where speakers come from the agency and they choose 3 or 4 speakers who get like 50 minutes to do their material. And the rest, their only job is to take notes and give feedback. How can you become better?
Amazing.
And what was fascinating is that I went to a few of those, and those who showed up of the 500 speakers that my agency have, those who showed up, those who are the most booked, the most highly paid, the best speakers, because they're just obsessed with being the best. So they're like, oh, if I have an opportunity to be in front of speakers, no matter what level, and they can give me feedback, I want to take it. So it's quite inspiring that, yeah, those who are the best is a reason for it. They just like obsessed by getting feedback and becoming better.
Yeah, I think that, and it's a great point, and maybe it's also a bit about preparing somebody for this transition from, corporate role into the rest of their life, whatever that means. Specifically, it's speaking or consulting. Is making sure that you're, tending the garden, which is your network. Like, I actually sat with somebody who was quite good at LinkedIn right as I was making this transition. And this person helped me to look at my LinkedIn network from a more systematic perspective. And I thought, wow, it's actually quite solid. But because when I was working full time, I didn't really need my network that much. My network was internal mostly. I was the head of HR. So, I'm very focused on the internal network with some, reaching out to specific talents that we wanted to recruit. So that's really important because I liken the network to a garden. If you tend it and you fertilize it and you water it, it will grow. And in this, this chapter of the working life, that's really important because yes, I post a lot on LinkedIn. I do a lot of, self-marketing. I do a lot of promotion, but the majority of the connections come through others. You use a perfect example. Other speakers are some of the best leads and networkers that I've ever had. And that's just because we're all in it together in a way. It's, as you said, people are not particularly competitive. And I think the really good speakers with really good networks know that I'm not going to lose a gig to somebody else probably because they're so, specific on that topic. People know who they are. They have a reputation, but there are probably pieces of that they become acquainted with that they can't do. So they have to find somebody else. And if they're comfortable with that somebody else, which I hope is me, then they'll pass that on and vice versa. Then it gets passed back. And that kind of ecosystem of sharing is the tended garden.
Yeah, absolutely. No, if I just had 30 years in corporate and I left it and I was living in Paris or London or whatever, first step I would do is like work on my speech, then go to a speaker bureau, find the 5-6 speakers that I think like these guys look cool, and just message them directly. Like say, hey, I'm planning to do an evening where we can do our speeches and feedback. And don't mention you're a beginner, but then you get like feedback from the best and you get to network connect and you're that person. So
I think that was another thing that was really helpful for me was, again, because I had spent a lot of my career speaking in front of people. So speaking was not really, I don't have an intimidation of getting the microphone shoved in my face, but speaking as it relates to a speech is different than just speaking and riffing about whatever they're asking you to talk about. And so I actually engaged somebody to help me once I had written my first keynote, when I did the first book, to sit and listen to it and go through it and chop it up and redo it and redo it and redo it. And that was really helpful because, number one, I can think it's good messaging, but I've been saying that I know that message because it's been part of my career. If I'm delivering that message, it may not be so clear to people. So having somebody to give me that advice from a professional perspective was really helpful. And also just the act of, performing in front of a group. You're trying to take up a stage, you're trying to take up space, you're trying to be able to get your message across. And those kinds of techniques are also, I think, quite helpful, not just in being effective, but also being more confident. And the confident part helps enormously when I am engaging with other people who I'm awestruck by because they're such great keynote speakers. I feel like, okay, I deserve, or I can stand on a platform and I can have a conversation with this person and know that I have the confidence to not let them down if they give me a lead to something.
Yeah, no, that's amazing. And Greg, if we dive into like public speaking, so I was asked the question to everyone who's here, like, why do businesses book you? If you have like a 20, 30-second pitch, like, why do they book you? And what problem do you help them solve? And how do you open and close your talk?
So my experience is very deep in the human resources field in big companies. So the way I deliver my speech is to talk about very real life experiences and real life examples that people can touch, absorb, and do something with. I open my speech talking about how I became inspired to do work around human resources, how I became so inspired to learn and grow. And it really comes from my own personal experience and my family experience. I then, talk about these topics, but I try to deliver them in a way that people really can understand them from a storytelling perspective rather than here's a checklist of 6 things you should remember. I still have a checklist of 6 things that you should remember, but it's buried in storytelling. So people can listen, that story you told about this person or that person really resonated with me. That's where the message lies. And then I always try to make sure that people think about, okay, how am I going to walk out of this room and do something with that? So I'm inspired, I'm motivated, I learned something. So what? What do I do next? And that's the way I try to make keynotes and speeches that are alive, because they are people's stories and very useful in the workplace, in the personal space.
And the first 20 seconds on stage, how do you open up the show to Greg Morley?
So I tell the story of my mother, which was, she was in essence the inspiration of both of the books I wrote. And she had a very, I would say, epic life. And her epic life was full of lessons about inclusion and belonging and resilience. And some of it was quite tough and some of it is quite inspirational. And I try to tell that story through the stories that I've told in the book as a way to get people really drawn into the session. I also think from a very sort of practical perspective is when people come into the room, I always try to make sure that there's a very upbeat feeling, that there's, upbeat music playing, that people are encouraged to kind of talk to each other. I like the noise and the buzz when we start.
Yeah.
I think that helps people to feel like, okay, this is going to be something unique. So many times you walk into a room to listen to somebody speak and it feels like a funeral. And so the idea is to get people, get their energy up, get their pulse up, okay, I'm ready to hear this. I'm ready to engage them a bit, and then get into the core of the conversation. And of course, during the conversation, make sure that there's opportunities for people to refresh themselves with a little give and take.
Do you have a favorite song that you like to enter the stage with?
Yeah, I love to start with the Sister Sledge song, We Are Family.
Oh, cool. Yeah, I have Black and Black AC/DC.
That's a good one. So it has a vibe to it. And it also has a great feeling of togetherness, which is a lot of, what I talk about in my talks is about, bringing everybody into the conversation and not sort of talking down to people and using language that people don't understand. And so We Are Family is a great way to feel like, okay, we're all part of this talk. We can all be part of this. And the energy of the song's great.
Nice. And how do you finish it? Like, what does the last 20 seconds look like?
So I do a little session at the end where I ask people to talk to the person next to them and talk a little bit about what are the 1 or 2 things they took away and what are they going to do. And then I ask a couple of people to share. People are always usually willing to share 1 or 2 things.
That's nice.
And then I try to close with something that's quite poignant, a quote or some engagement that is relevant to the crowd that I'm speaking with. It depends on where I am in the world or what the crowd is. And then we get back to the walking out music, which is We Are Family, and get people up and
nice. I love that.
Okay, yeah. I really like to create moments during these talks where somebody walks away with lessons that they can take away, stories they remember. Maybe they met somebody in the room they hadn't talked with before, and they can really walk out of the room with more energy than they walked in with.
Yeah, same. Like when you make a change, I remember I spoke in North Norway one time, and a lady ran up to me after the talk, and she's like, "This was really good. We have a Gen Z starting in 2 hours. I need to run and do some stuff." I'm like, "Okay, good." She was like, "I'm running," and then she disappeared. I was like, "Yes, this is like, okay, we made some impact today."
Yeah, I think there's nothing more moving than when I hear, and I heard this after a talk I did about a month ago, and somebody said to me, "I had never thought of that the way you explained it, and it changes my perspective of that topic." So this was a very senior person, and it was on a very it was on the topic of diversity and inclusion, which is, we're getting constantly bombarded by these topics. And it helped him to think about in the perspective of his business, what it meant to them. But he thought about it in a different way. And that's, all I could ask for.
Yeah, no, it's making that impact. It's I would say that's like number one reason we do this, at least me. And then of course, like the paycheck is fun, but like making an impact and sharing ideas and your mission, it's super. At least for me, like it's the main driver. Greg, like just to get a bit technical, like I've been doing some research now on like what's the best way to finish, and I'm just curious, like your last slide, what do you have there? Like, is it a QR code, your LinkedIn? Can you just very briefly, like how does your last slide look like?
Yeah. So my last slide is, I think I say, let's continue the conversation. Mm-hmm. And I have a QR code both to my LinkedIn and to my Instagram. So nice. My LinkedIn is a bit more, so I would say technical. It's a bit more specifically related to leadership messages. My Instagram is a bit more personal, but still, appropriately personal. It's not a lot of shirtless pictures on the beach. It's about my it's about my work, and I try to give people the way to connect in either of those ways. And actually, people do quite fluently connect to those things. The important thing for anybody doing that is when you invite people to connect with you, that you don't just accept the connection, right? The magic is in you connect and you say, hey, thanks a lot for connecting. I'd love to be in touch. You do maybe a little research about that person. I love what you're doing, whatever it is that strikes you. But be grateful for the connection, because nobody has to click on your thing and connect with you. And
ask for a review. And ask for a review.
Yeah, exactly.
Always.
And this is how you engage with people, and you build your network, and you just never know where the conversation's going to go.
Yeah. Well, Greg, I would challenge you in adding a further QR code, especially if it's a conference that's open and in the audience there is like, it's not an internal event, but it's like maybe 200-300 leaders from different companies. What I'm seeing me working quite well lately is also like, if you have a QR code and you can be generous and give like away a digital free copy of your book and gather the emails and say like, hey, if you want the book and slide deck, you can go here. And I know speakers now who do that, and they send the list. If it's 5 or 20 emails, they send that list straight to the speaking agent, and they go like, hey, these 20 people were very interested in my topic and me. Can you contact them and try to sell them a gig? So it's a low cost because it's a digital book and it's already written, right? But as a lead that your speaker agent can contact and work on, it's quite powerful. But yeah,
I think that is such a great idea and such great insight. And this is again part of the journey of maybe book writing to converting books into something. So in the beginning, at least my view was, when you're writing a book, it's to sell books. And then as you start to realize that selling books is not a very effective way of making money, unless you're, Xi Jinping or Oprah Winfrey. I mean, they probably sell tens of millions of books. They probably make some royalties. But the book as a brand builder or something that's a calling card is important. So your idea of sort of gifting the book to the people that have gifted you with their connection is a great idea.
It's a good lead gen. I'm curious, have you tried this one? I've seen some speakers have done with success is that they go to an HR conference and they say like, hey, can you buy like 100 of my books for say 30 euros each? They give to every participant. And if you do that, I will also come and do like a free keynote. So you kind of like, you get your book out, but you also... Have you tried that? Has it worked?
Yeah, so that's how I launched the second book. I did that at this conference in Boston, and that worked quite well because it was, there's a lot of decision makers there who I subsequently followed up with. And that's maybe a lesson of how I started. Was my first 3 speaking gigs of my first book, I did just that. I spoke for free. They bought my book. So then everybody got the book. I had the opportunity to speak and frankly practice what I was speaking because it was the first time I had been doing it.
Yeah.
But then also to get the benefit of the social media content, which is like, okay, I've now spoken at these big companies, and I chose notably big companies where I had connections and I could work something out with them. That was a great way to launch into then being legitimate enough to charge for speaking.
Yeah. And that leads to my second 2 questions. So where do you feel the most early demand came from? Old network, referrals, bureaus, LinkedIn outreach, former colleagues? Like, if you say the first few months, like for someone who's transitioning from a super serious corporate job to your own, like where did you see and where would you recommend a new person to focus the most of their time and effort?
The best return for me was through people that knew me.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Because you are a new venture. And so I worked a lot with my network, but a very small part of my network, which were people that I had worked with before, good friends who I knew had good corporate networks, HR people specifically I had worked with that were now working in different organizations. So the return on that gardening, so to speak, was much higher than just the general kind of I'm out there. And even now, I think that's still the case. Having been involved with different networks, different organizations over time, still generates interest. And now, because I'm doing that work, the referral part is starting to be more effective as well, because somebody will say, "Oh, we heard him at this conference. You should get him in here. We'll refer you on." So I love the book idea, because I think that's a great way to continue that.
It gets it going.
Yeah. And one of the great challenges of doing this work for me is that when you're in a company, you have a cycle, right? The year starts, you have a budget, you have a team, you're doing reviews, we're selling product, we're launching new product, whatever the cycle is.
I'm just laughing because I know we don't have anything of that in our world.
No. And in our world, one of the things that came to my mind very quickly is, how do you create repeatability, right? So how does every single speaking opportunity not be like the end? So I'm going to speak to this organization, then how am I trying to build the next thing from that? That to me maybe was one of the hardest rhythmic changes that I had from my old life to my new life, because in my old life, a lot of what we were doing was focused about being more productive, being more efficient. When you're doing, a talk at X company in France, and then the next talk is at X company in London, and then you have 2 weeks later X company in the US. The topics might be very different. The audience is very different. And then you land it, it goes well, and then so what? So as you and I had spoken, this kind of network of people who are creating this ecosystem where you can build off of each other, I think is really important and unique.
Yeah, and a positive trend we're really seeing in speaking now, that a few years ago, it was very like, come in, do 20 to 45 minutes inspiration talk, motivate people and leave. What we see now is that more and more speakers I know and work with is that they usually more price it more as a project base over 12 months.
Yeah.
So it's like, I come to a speech, we do a workshop, we do some one-on-one with the leadership teams, then we do a 6-month workshop, how is it going? And then maybe a workshop recap. So we're going away from this 3,000-5,000 gigs to more like 10-15 euro packages where you can, really make sure that the message sticks and transformation happens. And I think that's for us speakers, it's a very positive trend, because then you get 10 of those gigs a year, and you're already kind of like, we have at least a nice European base. I know, US is a bit higher, but at least Europe, if you do 100K in Europe, you're kind of, the base is okay. And then you can, grow from that. Right. So.
Yeah, I tried that with one company, and that worked out quite well, where I was able to speak to a number of their senior management teams, to do some coaching and to do some consulting. And that worked quite well, because also for me, I got to know the organization. So I think I was even more valuable as we got further through that, because I knew the rhythm of their work. I knew some of the personalities, and I knew the business quite well.
Yeah. No, okay. So great. I see the time is running. I have like 2 more questions here, and we're going to wrap up. It's been super amazing. And I think every time I'll get a speaker who is like in a transition phase from like, should I quit my job or not, etc., I'll send this episode. And I think they'll be very inspired and get at least like some good roadmap tips. But I want to, like, if we can go back in time and think about, how did your first offer look like? And you can't use the LVMH consulting you had, but like your first offer, was it a keynote, workshop, coaching, advisory mix? Like, what was your first like commercial offer you actually sent out?
My first offer was a company in Hong Kong that had been introduced to me by a good friend.
Okay.
I knew some of the people. It was a talk around a Pride event, and the deal I worked out with them was they bought X number of my books, and then I spoke based on that. So there wasn't a sort of fee perspective. I didn't create a fee. One of the things that's very interesting in this transition is, when you have a job which is paid a salary, it's pretty easy to think, I deserve 5% more or 10% more or 15% more. When you are charging for a speaking or speech of some sort, or even consulting, even knowing what your value is very, so what I wanted to do.
For you?
I spoke with other people who had done similar work, and at the beginning I was like, I can't charge that. Nobody's going to pay that. But that's sort of how I benchmarked myself. And it's true. The way I think about how I price myself and price my speaking or a consultancy is not for everybody. And I don't want every job. I want to do work that's interesting for me too. And so I'm trying to do interesting work with interesting clients who really have an interest in growing and developing their organizations and their people. So that's sort of how I priced myself. But in the beginning, I did 3 events in a very short period of time where I asked them to buy books, and I didn't charge them for the speech itself.
Yeah, but it's a smart way to do it, to get the...
And it gave me confidence to say like, okay, I could do this. And actually it gave me a lot of good feedback because these were organizations where I knew people very well. And so I could say, okay, you're my 2 or 3 plants in the audience. Please take show notes, because at the end, I'm going to ask you what worked, what didn't work, what would you improve, that kind of thing. And so in a way, it was I was coaching myself in a way through the first couple of keynotes to make sure that when I did start to ask people to pay me for them, that the product was good. And again, why I did the coaching with the speech coach, to make sure that the product itself was good.
I think that was a very smart choice. Like Arman also, when he becomes Speaker of the Year, he invested heavily in a speech coach in the beginning, and it paid. Like usually that pays off like heavily.
Yeah.
Did you say yes to something early on that you realized you should have said no to? Did you have some regrets from when you were a bit like in... Yeah. Oh, shit.
I did. I learned the lesson of making sure you were very clear on contracting in the beginning. So I did say yes to something, and because I wasn't very fluent on the contracting of my time and the boundaries, the further we worked on it, they would say, oh, can you do this? Could you create this? And could we do this? And so that the scope started to get too large, and it was hard for me to pull it back because we had already sort of gone forward with it. Yeah. Ultimately, it worked out. It was a good experience because it taught me about the importance of contracting up front to make sure
so that important. Like always have like how many minutes on stage, what's the audience, location, date, how many meetings, 1 pre-meeting, 1 evaluation meeting. Hey guys, this is it. This is the price. This is included. If you want something more, we can discuss. And here's like even like a small tip there. It's like I learned from other speakers is that sometimes the client asks like, hey, we're going to record a talk. It's okay. We make it available internally. And I usually say like, yeah, you can have it for 3 months. It's going to be like 700 euros extra. And very rarely do they say no to that. And that's like just a nice way to kind of just like, hey, by just saying 1 sentence, you're already making a few percentage more on, it doesn't cost you anything. Right.
And I think I started to do that this year, which is actually to have a very simple contract template. It's just, it's as much for me as it is for the client to just say, okay, don't forget about this. Just what you said. That's exactly one of the things that came up was, oh, we want to put it in our sort of corporate academy for the next, I don't know, they
20 years.
I think they was going to live there forever. And I'm thinking like somebody's going to look at that in 10 years and go, that guy doesn't look like that anymore. So I said, to use some limited time. Yeah. So it's important. And I think, I encourage people to just even develop for their own checklist, a contract template that says, okay, these are the things you should make sure you're discussing and agreeing on. And I think that, frankly, if I'm the client, I think about myself when I was the client. That's a relief. Yeah, I appreciate knowing, like, what is it that you're going to do? What do we have to do? It also sets you up as being very professional. Yeah. So that's important for those of us that are in this world of consulting with people that have budgets and timelines and bosses, and to give them peace of mind about what you're actually going to do.
Yeah. And it's like, just like, I want to add something here. Like, so I'm doing a retreat, like soon now in June. And I sent a questionnaire to all the speakers and travel details. And I asked, let's start with big one. Do you already know when you arrive on Friday? It was yes, no, or I'm a speaker, will fix things last minute and live in chaos. Guess if everybody has chosen the last one. Yeah. So speakers, we tend to be messy and it's a bit like all over the place. Like contracts, it can be a lifesaver down the line. Just outline everything. Customers appreciate it. And now with AI, it's so easy to just like make it automated. Yeah,
exactly. And if you think about it from the perspective of the client, it's, being the last minute messy person is very difficult for them because, I'm just working on a talk for next month. And the client said, well, I need can you give me some FAQs? I said, sure, I have a FAQ list. And then she said, can you tell us what the answers are? And I said, oh, that's the first time I've been asked to actually give you the answers of what I'm going to say, because normally it's more organic than that. But now I know how they work. I know that their culture is probably a bit more tight, a little bit more control. So I know that I need to give them a bit more so that they feel comfortable. It will go well, but also maybe there's going to be other opportunities if our working arrangement is a good one.
Yeah. Greg, any last words? No, that sounds wrong. Any last tips for someone who is transitioning? any last tips for someone who is transitioning from big corporation to lifestyle business?
If I had one lesson that's a recurring lesson through my entire working career, and it's still, I think, the number one lesson of this part of my career, is get out of your own head as much as you can. How much time I spent laying in bed ruminating about one thing or another, like, how's this going to go? How's that person going to take it? And if you just take a few minutes to have conversation like this, you already gave me great suggestions that I can use that had we not had this conversation, I wouldn't have thought of myself. So there's a great relief in the diversity of thought that you get from talking to other people. And especially at this point of our life, when we're transitioning from these great jobs where you have lots of people around you that are either giving you advice or taking your advice or supporting you, to when you're on your own, try to recreate that. In the working world, we called it a board of directors. Create that board of directors around you that can give you advice on different elements of what you're trying to do. I guarantee you will end up with a better product and probably retain more of your hair, because you won't lose it all in the stress of making this transition from corporate world to speaking world.
Oh, I really love that one. I'm going to add on top of that investing into speaker trainings. This is my biggest regret, is that I was really cocky the first 10 years. I got good testimonials, everything. And my agency that represents me in Norway, they always did this weekend trainings, some better storytelling, all this. And 2 years ago, I went in January and I learned so much from there, how to use tech, Slido, quizzes. I learned so much that next day I just went back into the drawing board, added, and you feel like my price is going up, my quality is going up. So just don't be afraid to invest, right? And it goes to all the aspects. Athletes invest into sneakers, trainers, equipment. It's the same with speaking.
Yeah.
They invest into good clothing, staging. I even have a special, just one pair of Adidas white sneakers. They're only for stage presence. I bring them in a bag, and the moment I go before stage, I put them on. So they're completely new, shiny, bright. So it's just about all the small details. It's my mom. She's always pushing me. You need to dress nice and all this. So.
No, but that's, if I think about one of the best investments I ever made in my career, it was going to Toastmasters when I was 26 years old. So learning how to stand up and speak in front of people and not be intimidated by that and not losing your breath and all these things. Fast forward now, 40 years and 35 years. And, when I think about what you're going to do in Spain next month, I'm gutted that I can't come, because I think I will come to the next one, because what a great opportunity that is to learn from other people in a safe environment where people are there just to help other people grow and learn and become better at the craft. I mean, that's an incredible experience.
Yeah. Cool. Well, Greg, thank you so much for joining. This was amazing and really amazing. Thank you so much for all the honest tips and how you felt transition. I think a lot of people will appreciate it. Nice.
Well, thanks for my tips. Cool. I have to get back to revising my offer. I love your...
Hey, I hope you like this episode. If you are a speaker and you already have paid gigs, but you want more, bigger stages and more consistency in the amount of bookings, we work one-on-one with speakers to help them get more gigs and increase their sales. Check out Become a Speaker NO in the link below. If you're just starting out or you have had a few gigs and you want to really become a successful public speaker, check out our 8-week bootcamp. Here, we help speakers create their speaker reel, website, positioning, beautiful presentation with amazing slides, storyline, and also land that first big paid speaking gig. Check out the 8-week program below. And I'm always excited to work with passionate speakers who have a very interesting story and valuable advice to share.